Yeah, I probably don't have to say much about you. Most of you know you here. You are a PhD candidate at Frankfurt University, and your research focuses on mobility, migration, and transnational life worlds, exploring questions of citizenship, that's also why you ask, I guess, belonging and border experiences, and especially on Ghanaian migrants between Germany and Ghana. And today you talk about cowork, multimodal research with returned Ghanaians. You're welcome, thank you.
Okay, so thank you for having me, and I hope there's some attention left for the last presentation. And yeah, I want to share some reflections from my PhD research from 2023 until 2025. And I worked on return and deportation from Germany to Ghana. And in this presentation, I want to show how I actually worked with people who experienced violent border practices and who were forcefully returned to Ghana after they have traveled through the Mediterranean Sea to Italy and then mostly to Germany. In doing so, I want to introduce the concept of co-work as a way or as a methodological orientation within my project. So I will ask what kinds of research engagement take shape when we take inequalities, different interests, and forms of commitment seriously. And what happens when we understand them as fundamental parts of research rather than as problems we have to solve. And to introduce you to my research a bit more, I want to take you with me to one of my research settings. During one of my weeks in Kumasi, one of the biggest cities in Ghana, I met Prempe, a professional kente weaver, for the first time at his workplace in a rural village about 1 hour from the city. And you can see the setting here. So in our first meeting, he showed me his kente work. This is kind of a traditional way of weaving from the Ashanti region. And later, while we were sitting in front of his rented apartment, he began telling me about his years in Germany and his return to Ghana. He described how he worked in Germany for many years, but then experienced the deportation because his temporary residence permit was not renewed. He was brought into an airplane in northern Germany and accompanied by police officers during the flight back to Accra. He arrived in Accra with 50 euros transport money and empty-handed, as he described it. As he spoke, it became increasingly clear that he was trying to communicate. What he was trying to communicate was not simply a sequence of events, one after another, but a deeply embodied experience of border restrictions and violence. At the end of the conversation with me, he took a deep breath and asked with a lot of frustration in his voice, "How can I make you understand?" There was no time left that day, so we exchanged phone numbers and then parted ways. But the question stayed with me, and also his skepticism of even creating a moment of mutual understanding. At other times, people actually declined participation in the project, as joining a Germany-based project was seen as supporting the German border regime. So my positionality as a researcher holding a German passport was highly problematic, linked as it was to the subsequent mobility privilege, and people connected this position to the violence of the border regime itself. So this became a central methodological and also epistemological challenge, and I asked, how can experience of forced return be communicated? And how can we know with people whose mobility is shaped by border violence we are seen as being part of? And these questions led me toward a different way of thinking about research engagements. Probably you know a lot of work about collaboration in anthropology, and these approaches often assume shared goals, stable collaboration, common outputs, but also collaboration throughout the entire research process. So from the start, then the fieldwork, and then also the writing process. But my fieldwork looked very differently, as it was not planned as a collaborative project from the start. And this is where cowork comes in. It describes a different way of working together. So it refers to situational and episodic forms of working together, and sometimes also working alongside one another. It describes overlapping interests and also asymmetrical contributions, and unequal authority and different levels of commitment are acknowledged. It also includes multiple outcomes, so not one outcome we all agree on, but multiple outcomes, multimodal outcomes, stories, videos, but also shared activities to remember together. So unlike many collaborative projects, cowork does not begin with a shared goal. It emerges gradually through overlapping interests, also unequal contributions, and forms of engagement that may be temporary or fragmented. It can be understood rather as an open-ended search for research practices and ways of knowing together. Today I want to show you 3 different examples how these research engagements looked like in my research. So one form of co-work emerged through the work with photographs, videos, and audiovisual sketches. So we come back to Prempe, who asked, how can I make you understand? Some weeks after this meeting, he started sending me photographs and short videos via WhatsApp. These images were often connected to previous discussions we had before. And here you can see him, and he's standing next to the candy shop he used to own, where he sold his fabrics. We later then discussed the image, and he explained that it represented a period of relative stability and comfort in his life after he returned. And he put it as, if everything goes gradually, if every day in, day out, the business moves as required, then I will be comfortable. So the photographs became a way of talking about his experiences, aspirations, and also the challenges he faced after being back. I tried to take that up, how he kind of engaged with me, and started to create some audiovisual sketches from his photographs and videos, connected also to my photographs and videos I made during fieldwork. We watched these sketches together later, and he commented on them, expanded them, and also added some aspects that I had forgotten, or he wanted to stress something else that was not really in the video. So the images and videos not simply documented his experiences, but they became a medium through which we worked on our mutual understanding together. So audiovisual material signifies here a methodological tool. Prempe actively shaped the research process as he decided what to share with me, how to send it to me, and also how to comment on that. And it was based on shared but not identical interests. So for him it was a way to remember, and he mentioned a lot that it was also kind of a stress relief for him to send me the pictures and talk about them again, because deportation is a very stigmatized topic in Ghana, and he doesn't really talk about that subject with other people. We shared a political stance to make the topic more visible, as I'm also part of anti-deportation movements. But for me, it was also part of my academic career. So it was not an equal way of working together, but we had these overlapping interests. Another way co-work unfolded in my project was through co-writing and the medium of text. So the practice developed gradually through conversations with Simon. He was also returned to Ghana, and during one of the meetings, we already got to know each other we already knew each other for some weeks. He mentioned that he used to write regularly when he was young, and that he would actually like to start doing that again. I also described, okay, I'm doing my research, and writing is also part of my everyday life. Sometimes it was a very tedious process, but then we started to experiment with different forms of writing together. Simon wrote about his experiences in Germany, his return to Ghana, but also about his everyday life, about plans for the future. And I wrote about fieldwork and also our meetings. Then we kind of exchanged these texts and read them out loud or quietly. And then we returned to them and had a conversation about the texts. So this text generated then further discussions. Reflections on return from Germany led to stories about his travels to Libya, and thoughts about coping opened discussions about economic instability and politics in Ghana right now. So you can see one text here Simon wrote titled Coming Home, Coping and Being Back. It ties in what Campbell and Lasita described within collaborative contexts, that ethnographic writing works between people, making and remaking the individual, communities and issues it engages. So what I find interesting is that the writing actually emerged from Simon's interests. He was not interested in having like long conversations only, but he said he wanted to engage in writing again. So text became shared objects of discussion and reflection, while they also enabled remembering and also talking about experiences again. A third way, and also very central way people worked with me, was through documents. Here you can see the work with Rose. I visited her very regularly Monday mornings in her apartment, and she frequently showed me the documents. You can see here, for example, the vaccination passport she got at the asylum center in Cologne, then like a paper from her flight back to Accra, but also the time before she went to Germany and Ghana. She's standing in front of a church. There above you can see one picture where she stands, or where she is with the man she used to work in Ghana. And the documents were not merely sources of information, but they embodied her border experiences and the stages of her mobility trajectory. So they became methodological orientations that structured our conversations and enabled different forms of remembering. And it's kind of what Annelies Riles argues in her work, that the document not only signifies an ethnographic object or an analytical category, but that it is a methodological orientation. However, cowork does not eliminate inequalities. Actually, it makes them even more visible. There were a lot of difficult questions arising through the project, and here are some of them. It's not every question, but for example, question about authority. So who decides what counts as like relevant knowledge? Is it a picture, is it a document, is it a visual sketch, or is it the conversation we have afterwards? So what is relevant for us? And also the question of shared interests. What are we actually working towards together? And how we can match our interests. Then the outcome. What do we want to make visible in a final output? Like, is there a possibility to have another output beyond a dissertation for an academic public or audience? And then the question of authorship, like who's the author of the kind of knowledge we co-produced? For example, the texts Simon has written. Like, who's the author when I use them in my dissertation? So these questions led us in the direction to design a film project together. We are now into the finishing period, and to also kind of have the chance to show these experiences or this kind of material to a Ghanaian audience, also beyond the academic sphere. Also, I want to share some orientations with you, and they are not solutions, because I think there are no solutions, but they are orientations. And I think the point is not to overcome inequalities, because they are there, very material there. I think it's important to remain attentive to them throughout the research process and to actively address them also in terms of methodological engagement. So what was important for us in the co-work was being transparent, like discussing expectations openly, addressing intentions and also limitations of the project, and also reflecting on power and authority, like who holds the funding, where does the funding come from, and so on. Then it was crucial, that is like the typical anthropological point, I would say, to take time and to meet again, to have a lot of follow-throughs, and to develop trust through that kind of time we shared. And also time to negotiate interests and commitments, not only to produce knowledge that is relevant for an academic project. At the same time, it was a super important point to also endure differences, that you also acknowledge that we try to acknowledge that not all disagreements must be resolved, that there are differences and conflicts that are not resolvable. And that also means to respect refusals, accepting that co-work can also fade out if people don't even have the resources anymore to take part, or if they also decide that they don't want to take part anymore, and that is actually how they stress their agency within the project. So in total, it's about staying with tensions rather than smoothing them over. Okay, so concluding remarks, what does co-work show? Co-work draws attention to forms of working together that emerge when people ask, how can I make you understand? And co-work encourages us to take seriously people's interests, forms of expression, their expectations, and also their level of commitment. It describes what Anand Pandian describes as possible anthropology in times of unease that have to embrace improvisation, ambiguity, and imagination, especially in contexts with a lot of violence involved. Estallea and Criado speak about creative improvisations and inventive activities as part of ethnographic fieldwork today. So when we take that seriously, the ethnographic encounter forms an improvised and multimodal space, a space in which different forms of knowing together and alongside become possible through a shared search for research practices. There's also an article on the Boas blogs if you're interested in that, and thank you very much.